The grand ballroom of the Crestwood Hotel was a symphony of cream roses and shimmering gold, a testament to the impeccable taste and bottomless budget of the Beaumont family. Liam Sterling stood near a towering arrangement of hydrangeas, the cloying sweetness of the flowers, a strange counterpoint to the metallic taste of dread forming in his mouth. He thought he was marrying the love of his life, Fiona Beaumont. He thought the quiet condescension from her family, the subtle dismissiveness he'd endured for months, was a price worth paying. He was wrong. He didn't know that his bride was celebrating their union by confessing a betrayal that would shatter not just their future, but his past. Within an hour, his entire world would be dismantled and rebuilt, not by her actions, but by his silence. He had stepped away from the receiving line, needing a moment to simply breathe. The pressure of the day, of being the quiet, unassuming groom in the bride's opulent world, was immense. He felt the smooth, worn leather of the portfolio in his left hand, a silent anchor in a sea of unfamiliar faces and whispered judgments. It was then that he heard it, Fiona's voice, a musical lilt that had once been his favorite sound, carried from the other side of the floral mountain. She was speaking to her sister and maid of honor, Chloe. Her tone was conspiratorial, tinged with a giddy, reckless excitement. "Can you believe it? We actually did it," Chloe whispered, her voice a rustle of silk and champagne. "I know," Fiona replied, and Liam's heart clenched at the sheer joy in her voice. "It's perfect. Everything is perfect." There was a pause, a shared breath between sisters. Then Fiona added the words that would echo in the chambers of Liam's heart forever. The words were not loud, not meant for him, but they found him with the precision of a sniper's bullet. "God, I'm so exhausted, though," she giggled. "I was with his brother last night for a final celebration." The world did not stop. The string quartet did not miss a note. The guests did not cease their happy chatter. But for Liam, everything went silent. The vibrant colors of the ballroom bled into a muted gray. The portfolio in his hands suddenly felt immensely heavy, each document inside a testament to a life Fiona knew nothing about, a future she had just casually incinerated. He heard Chloe's shocked gasp, followed by a nervous laugh. "Fiona, you didn't." "Of course I did," Fiona said, her voice dripping with a smug confidence that turned Liam's stomach. "Mark gets it. He understands this world. It was a release, a way to say goodbye to my old life. Don't look so horrified. It's not like Liam will ever know. He's too sweet, too simple." Simple. The word landed like a stone in the quiet pool of his shock. He had been called many things in his life, driven, brilliant, exacting, but never simple. It was, he realized, the most profound insult he had ever received, because it revealed the true depth of her condescension. She had not married him. She had acquired a pet, a project, a man she believed she could mold and control. And his own brother Mark, the betrayal was a two-headed serpent, its fangs sinking into him from both sides. He did not move. He did not storm out from behind the hydrangeas. He did not scream or accuse. A strange, glacial calm settled over him. The initial shock receded, replaced by a clarity so sharp it was painful. He was an architect. He built things. He understood structure, stress points, and the critical importance of a flawless foundation. And he had just discovered that the foundation of his entire life was a lie, built on sand and secrets. So he did what an architect does when a foundation is compromised. He began, silently and methodically, to draw up the demolition plans. He took a single, deep breath, the scent of roses now smelling of decay. He adjusted his tie, squared his shoulders, and stepped out from behind the flowers, a serene smile fixed on his face. Fiona saw him, and her face lit up. A perfect, beautiful lie. She had no idea that the man walking toward her was no longer her groom, but her judge. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for this story. It's one of those moments that I think a lot of us fear, the discovery of a deep betrayal when you least expect it. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to keep your composure when all you wanted to do was explode? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoy this journey of vindication, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. All right, let's get back to the reception. The night is far from over. Fiona glided towards him, a vision in white lace in feigned innocence. There you are. I was looking for you. Dad wants to give the main toast soon. She looped her arm through his, her touch now feeling like a brand. I was just admiring the arrangements, Liam said, his voice even and steady, a marvel of control he hadn't known he possessed. Your mother has exquisite taste. She does, doesn't she? Fiona beamed, completely missing the subtext, the faint trace of irony. To her, this was just a statement of fact. The Beaumonts had taste. The Beaumonts had money. The Beaumonts had class. And Liam, in her eyes, was the lucky beneficiary of it all. They made their way to the head table, a long, elevated platform that felt less like a place of honor and more like a stage for his public humiliation. His brother Mark was there, laughing with one of Fiona's cousins. Mark, his younger brother, the one he'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, and defended from bullies. Mark caught his eye and raised a glass, a wide, triumphant grin on his face. It was the grin of a man who believed he'd gotten away with something. Liam met his gaze and gave a small, slow nod, an acknowledgement that Mark would later, in the quiet, desperate hours of the night, realize was not one of camaraderie, but of condemnation. Fiona's father, Richard Beaumont, a portly man whose expensive suit could not conceal a core of profound arrogance, tapped a knife against his champagne flute. The room quieted. Richard cleared his throat, beaming out at the crowd of people who owed him money, favors, or at the very least, fealty. "Welcome, everyone, welcome," he boomed. "What a day, what a glorious day, to see my little girl, my Fiona, looking so happy." He paused, letting his gaze fall on Liam. It was not a warm gaze. It was the look of a man assessing a recent and possibly questionable acquisition. "And to welcome a new son into our family, Liam." He said the name as if it were a foreign word he was struggling to pronounce. "Now, Liam here is an architect, a noble profession, building things. We like builders in this family." A ripple of polite laughter went through the Beaumont side of the room. "He's a quiet fellow, but they say still waters run deep. We're certainly hoping they run deep enough to keep our Fiona in the style to which she is accustomed." More laughter, this time louder. It was a joke, but like all of Richard's jokes, it had teeth. The implication was clear. Liam was insufficient. Liam was a charity case. Liam was lucky to be there. Fiona giggled, squeezing Liam's hand under the table as if to say, "Don't worry, darling, I'll protect you from my big, scary father." But Liam knew it was all part of the performance. He could feel the eyes of her family on him, a collective weight of judgment. He smiled faintly, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his new family. He saw Eleanor, Fiona's mother, whose smile never quite reached her eyes. He saw Chloe, who was now pointedly avoiding his gaze, her face pale with the knowledge of her sister's secret. And he saw Mark, who winked at Fiona when he thought Liam wasn't looking. Then it was Liam's turn. The best man, his friend David, gave a short, heartfelt speech about Liam's loyalty and integrity, words that now felt like daggers. Then David introduced him. Liam stood up, the leather portfolio still in his hand. He placed it gently on the lectern, a strange and formal gesture that caused a few people to murmur. He looked out at the sea of faces, his eyes finding Fiona's. He held her gaze. "Thank you, Richard, for those welcoming words," he began, his voice calm and clear, filling the silent room. "I am not a man of many words, My work is in structures, in lines and form. I believe in foundations. I believe that what you build is only as strong as the ground you build it on." He let the words hang in the air. He could see Fiona shifting slightly, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This was not the simple, fumbling speech she had expected. "Fiona came into my life like a sudden, brilliant design," he continued, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "She is all light and color and energy, and I thought she was the final piece of a blueprint I had been working on my entire life." He paused, looking directly at her. "They say a home isn't a place, it's a feeling. It's a place of trust, of safety, of truth." He saw a flash of something in her eyes. Was it guilt? Or just annoyance that he was taking so long? "To the Beaumont family," he said, raising his glass and turning his body slightly to face Richard and Eleanor. "Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for welcoming me. I promise to build a life for your daughter that is worthy of her, and worthy of the values I hold most dear: honesty, loyalty, and unwavering integrity." He drank. The room erupted in applause. It was the perfect speech, gracious, humble, and full of just the right amount of sentiment. Only Liam knew that every word was a lie, a carefully constructed facade over a chasm of betrayal. And as he sat down, Fiona leaned over and kissed his cheek. "That was beautiful, darling," she whispered. "A little serious, but beautiful. See, I told you you'd be fine." He looked at her, at the flawless makeup, the sparkling eyes, the perfect smile, and felt nothing but a profound and chilling emptiness. The performance had to continue. The humiliation was not yet complete. He needed more data, more proof, more stones to build the wall that would eventually and permanently separate him from these people. He needed to see just how deep the rot went. And so he smiled back. "For you, Fiona," he said softly, "anything." The next part of the ritual was the opening of the gifts. It was an ordeal Liam had been dreading even before he'd overheard the conversation that had redefined his world. His own family was small, his parents having passed away years ago. His relatives were modest, hard-working people: a teacher, a nurse, a mechanic. Their gifts were heartfelt but simple: a set of hand-thrown pottery bowls, a framed print from a local artist, a lovingly assembled photo album of Liam's childhood that his aunt had spent months creating. As each gift was opened, a polite but cool silence fell over the Beaumont side of the room. Eleanor would murmur, "How charming," in a tone that suggested she'd found a particularly interesting insect in her salad. Fiona, to her credit, tried to feign enthusiasm, but her smiles were tight, and her thank yous were quick, eager to move on to the next, more substantial offering. Then came the gifts from her family's friends: glistening silver from Tiffany's, crystal from Waterford, checks with an astonishing number of zeros. With each one, Richard would let out a satisfied grunt, as if keeping a running tally in his head. The message was clear. This was real value. This was what mattered. Finally, it was time for the parents' gifts. Liam's Aunt Carol, who had practically raised him, stood and presented them with a beautiful, hand-stitched quilt. Each square depicted a different scene from their lives: the cafe where they'd had their first date, the park where he'd proposed, the city skyline. It was a work of art, a testament of love and time. "Oh," Fiona said, holding it up. "The quilt was beautiful, but it wasn't Baccarat. This is so much work." She folded it quickly and set it aside, the gesture a clear dismissal. Liam saw the hurt flash across his aunt's face before she masked it with a polite smile. He made a mental note, adding it to a growing list in his mind: the list of grievances. Then Richard and Eleanor stood, beaming. "Well," Richard began, rocking on his heels, "we wanted to give you two something to get you started on the right foot. A proper foundation, as Liam would say." He shot Liam a condescending wink. Eleanor handed Fiona a small, elegant envelope. Fiona opened it with theatrical flair. She gasped. "Oh, Daddy, Mummy, you shouldn't have." She practically sang the words. She turned to Liam, her eyes shining with triumph. "Look, darling, they've given us the down payment for a condo. A very, very generous one." She showed him the check. It was indeed a substantial amount of money, enough for a down payment on a perfectly respectable but small two-bedroom unit in a decent but not luxurious part of the city. "It's in the new Carrington building," Richard announced to the room. "Good starter place. We've already spoken to the agent. Of course," he added, his voice dropping into a stage whisper that was perfectly audible to everyone at the table. "We'll have to co-sign on the loan, of course, given Liam's current situation." The humiliation was exquisite. It was a perfectly calibrated blow, designed to both elevate their own generosity and underscore Liam's perceived financial inadequacy in a single stroke. He was not a partner in this marriage. He was a dependent, a project to be managed. Liam looked at the check, then at the beaming faces of his new in-laws, then at the triumphant smile of his wife. She was waiting for him to be grateful, to be overwhelmed by their largesse. She expected him to gush, to thank them profusely for saving him, for providing for her in a way he so obviously could not. He took the check from her fingers. He folded it neatly, once, twice. He slid it into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket, and he looked Richard Beaumont directly in the eye. "Richard, Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden lull, "I am speechless. This is a truly significant gesture. Thank you." Relief washed over Fiona's face. Richard puffed out his chest, satisfied. Liam had reacted exactly as he was supposed to. He had accepted his place. But as he spoke the words, Liam's fingers brushed against the cool leather of the portfolio resting on the table beside him. Inside it was a different kind of document, not a check for a down payment, but a deed. A deed to a house he had designed and built himself. A sprawling masterpiece of glass and stone and cedar overlooking the ocean. A property whose value could purchase the entire Carrington building outright, with enough left over for a small fleet of luxury cars. He had planned to give her the keys that very night, to watch her face as he revealed the true scope of his success. A secret he had kept not out of a desire to deceive, but out of a desire to be loved for himself, not for his fortune. The irony was so thick he could taste it. They were offering him a cage, a small, respectable, parent-approved cage, and calling it a castle. And all the while he held the keys to a kingdom they couldn't even imagine. He let his hand rest on the portfolio. The weight was reassuring. It was a promise that this performance would have a final act. And in that act, the roles would be very, very different. He met his brother's gaze across the table again. Mark was smirking, a look of shared amusement passing between him and Fiona. They were laughing at the poor, simple architect and his good fortune. The list in Liam's mind grew longer. The formal part of the evening bled into the less structured chaos of the reception party. The band, a slick 10-piece ensemble that probably cost more than Liam's first car, struck up a lively tune. It was time for the first dance. As Liam led Fiona to the floor, her hand in his, he felt a profound sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie of someone else's life. "I can't believe how perfect tonight is," she murmured, resting her head on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. Her scent, a custom perfume he'd had designed for her as a birthday gift, filled his senses. It was a scent he had once associated with love and desire. Now it smelled of duplicity. "Is it?" he asked, his voice a low murmur against her hair. "Of course it is," she said, pulling back slightly to look at him, a small frown creasing her brow. "Don't be morose. Everyone is here, the food is divine, and my parents just gave us a home." "They gave us a down payment," he corrected gently, "for an apartment." "Don't be difficult, Liam," she sighed, the patient tone one might use with a stubborn child. "You know what I mean. We'll be comfortable. We'll be taken care of until your little firm starts landing some bigger projects. Dad can even help with that. He knows people." His little firm, Sterling Vance Architects, a boutique company to be sure, but one that had won nearly every major design award in the past 5 years. A firm that was currently heading the largest urban renewal project in the state. A firm where he was not just an employee, but the founding partner. The Sterling in Sterling Vance. He had kept his success quiet, enjoying the anonymity, wanting to be sure Fiona was with him for him. Now he saw that his test had yielded a definitive, if heartbreaking, result. She wasn't with him for him. She wasn't even with him for his money, because she had no idea it existed. She was with him because she saw him as a blank canvas on which her family could paint their masterpiece of control. The song ended. Before the next one could begin, a hand clapped Liam on the shoulder. It was Mark. "My turn, brother," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Gotta dance with the bride." He didn't wait for an answer, simply pulling Fiona into his arms as the band launched into a faster, more energetic song. Liam was left standing alone in the center of the dance floor. He didn't move. He watched them, and what he saw confirmed everything. This was not the awkward, shuffling dance of a brother-in-law. This was something else. Mark's hand was too low on Fiona's back. Their bodies were too close. They moved together with a familiar, practiced rhythm. They laughed, and Fiona threw her head back, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Mark with an intimacy that should have been reserved for her husband. It was not a secret. It was a public declaration. They were so confident in Liam's blindness, in his simplicity, that they felt no need to hide. He could feel the eyes of the guests on him, watching his reaction. He could sense their pity, their morbid curiosity. The poor cuckold. He was the star of a tragedy, and he was the last one to be informed. He turned and walked off the dance floor, his face a mask of calm. He didn't go to the bar. He didn't retreat to the men's room to splash water on his face. He walked with purpose through an archway, into a quieter, dimly lit corridor that led to the hotel's administrative offices. He pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a single contact, marked only with the letter A. He pressed the call button. It rang once. "Arthur," a voice answered, crisp and alert despite the late hour. "Arthur," Liam said, his voice steady. "It's me." "Liam, is everything all right? I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight of all nights." Arthur Vance was his mentor, his business partner, and the closest thing he had to a father. A man of immense wisdom and unwavering loyalty. "Change of plans," Liam said, his gaze falling on the dancers in the ballroom, a kaleidoscope of color and motion. He could see Fiona and Mark still laughing, still too close. "The housewarming gift, the final portfolio. I need you to bring it." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Arthur was a man who understood nuance. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't demand an explanation. He heard the steel in Liam's voice and understood everything he needed to know. "How much time do I have?" Arthur asked. "The reception is winding down. The family is planning a private toast in the Beaumont suite in about an hour," Liam said. "Be there." "I'm on my way," Arthur said. "And Liam." "Yes?" "Whatever it is," his old friend said, "remember who you are. You are not the man they think you are. You are the man who builds things. And sometimes you are the man who tears them down to build something better." "I know," Liam said softly, and ended the call. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. He felt a profound sense of peace descend upon him. The calculation phase was over. The planning was complete. The final act was about to begin. He walked back into the ballroom, back into the lion's den, but he was no longer the prey. He was the hunter, and he was ready. An hour later, the grand ballroom was nearly empty. The band was packing up, and the cleanup crew was beginning to move through the wreckage of the celebration. The core family, as Richard Beaumont had decreed, was to assemble in the presidential suite on the top floor for a final, intimate toast to the future. The very phrase made Liam's skin crawl. The suite was opulent to the point of absurdity. Gold leaf on the ceiling, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a sprawling terrace that overlooked the entire city. It was a stage perfectly set for a display of power, and Richard intended to be the star. Liam entered the room last. Fiona was there, her shoes kicked off, a glass of champagne in her hand. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, were seated on a velvet sofa, looking regal and proprietary. Her sister, Chloe, hovered nervously by the window, refusing to meet anyone's eye. And there was Mark, leaning against the marble fireplace, looking for all the world like he belonged there. He was the only member of Liam's family who had been invited to this private conclave, a fact that was now screamingly significant. "Ah, there he is," Richard boomed, gesturing with his glass. "Come in, son, come in. Let's have a chat about how things are going to be." Liam walked calmly to the center of the room. He placed his leather portfolio on the heavy glass coffee table. The soft thud was the only sound in the room. Fiona looked at the portfolio and rolled her eyes. "Liam, darling, can you please put your work away for 5 minutes? It's our wedding night." "This isn't work, Fiona," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "It's our future. And Richard is right. We should have a chat about how things are going to be." Richard, mistaking this for acquiescence, leaned forward eagerly. "Excellent. Glad to see you're ready to be sensible. Now, first things first, the condo. Eleanor and I have handled the down payment, but you'll need to secure the mortgage. My bank will handle it, provided you agree to a financial management plan. Fiona will handle the joint accounts, naturally. She has a better head for these things." Fiona nodded in agreement, sipping her champagne. "Second," Richard continued, ticking points off on his fingers, "your job. This little boutique firm of yours is all well and good, a nice hobby, but it's not going to cut it. I have a friend, Tom Hatcher, runs a major development corporation. I've arranged a meeting for you. It's an entry-level project manager role, but with my guidance you could move up. You need to provide for my daughter, Liam, properly." Liam listened, his face impassive. He let the man talk, let him lay all his cards on the table, let him build the cage of his own arrogance bar by bar. Eleanor nodded along with every word, a serene smile on her face. Mark watched with an amused smirk. This was the natural order of things, their expressions said. The Beaumonts were in charge. Richard finally finished his monologue, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "So, that's the plan. Simple, effective. Any questions?" Liam looked around the room, at each of their faces. He saw the smug certainty, the unshakable belief in their own superiority. He let the silence stretch, becoming heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "Just a few points of clarification." He reached out and laid his hand on the portfolio. "Before we continue, there are a few things we need to clarify." The tone of his voice had changed. The humility was gone, replaced by something cold and hard and utterly unyielding. It was the voice he used in boardrooms, the voice that had made architects twice his age back down. For the first time that evening, a flicker of uncertainty appeared in Richard Beaumont's eyes. "What clarification is needed?" Richard blustered. "It's all quite straightforward." "Is it?" Liam asked. He unlatched the portfolio. The soft clicks of the brass fasteners sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. "I don't think it is." He pulled out the first sheaf of papers, bound in a neat blue cover. "Let's start with my job. The little firm, as you call it." He slid the document across the glass table. It stopped directly in front of Richard. The title on the cover was stark and clear. Sterling Vance Architects, Articles of Incorporation. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Liam said, his voice a blade of ice. "I don't work for Sterling Vance. I am Sterling. My partner, Arthur Vance, whose name you might recognize from the Vance wing of the city's art museum, and I founded the company a decade ago out of my dorm room. The sabbatical I've been on for the past year, the one that gave you the impression I was between projects, was to write a textbook on sustainable urban design. It's being published by MIT Press next fall. The air in the room became thin, hard to breathe. Richard stared at the document, his face turning a blotchy red. He looked from the paper to Liam's face, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. That's not possible, Eleanor whispered, her hand flying to her throat. Oh, it's quite possible, Liam said, his gaze sweeping over them. He pulled out a second document. It was a multi-page financial statement. He didn't slide this one across the table. He simply held it up. And as for my current situation and my inability to provide for your daughter, this is my personal financial disclosure from the end of the last fiscal quarter. I won't bore you with the details, but let's just say the number in the bottom right corner has 2 commas in it, and the first number is not a 1. A choked sound came from Fiona. She had put her champagne glass down. Her face was a mask of utter, stupefying shock. The world she knew, the hierarchy she understood, was tilting on its axis. The poor, simple man she had married as a pet project was, in fact, a titan of industry she had failed to recognize. So you see, Richard, Liam continued, his voice dangerously soft, while I appreciate the offer to get me an entry-level job with your friend Tom, I'm afraid I'll have to decline. Tom's company, Hatcher Development, is actually one of our major clients. In fact, we're currently in litigation with them over a rather significant contract breach. But I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world turned upside down. The power dynamics in the room had not just shifted, they had undergone a seismic, catastrophic reversal. The Beaumonts, who had built their identities on the bedrock of their wealth and status, were suddenly standing on shifting sand, looking up at a man they had spent months looking down on. Fiona stared at Liam, her mouth slightly agape, as if seeing him for the first time. And in a way, she was. But she was not seeing a man she could love. She was seeing an opportunity she had catastrophically misjudged. And the horror of that realization was just beginning to dawn on her face. Richard Beaumont's face had cycled to a spectrum of colors, from cherry red to a pasty, unhealthy gray. He picked up the incorporation document as if it were venomous, his hands trembling slightly. This is a joke, some kind of elaborate, sick joke. I assure you, Richard, I am not joking, Liam said, his composure absolute. He turned his attention to the elegant envelope from Richard and Eleanor, which Fiona had left on the table. He picked it up, retrieving the neatly folded check from his jacket pocket and placing it back inside. He held the envelope between his thumb and forefinger. And this, he said, his voice laced with a new, chilling politeness, the down payment for the condo. It was a very thoughtful gesture. He looked at Fiona, then at her parents. But it won't be necessary. He reached back into his portfolio and pulled out a third document, this one thicker, bound in rich, dark leather. He placed it on the table with a quiet finality. It was a deed. On top of it, he placed a single, glossy photograph. You see, I had my own plans for where we would live, Liam explained. I believe a man should provide a home for his wife. Fiona picked up the photograph. Her eyes widened. The photo was of a house, but house was an insufficient word. It was a breathtaking structure of glass and steel and warm cedar, cantilevered over a cliff with a 180-degree view of the ocean. It was more than a mansion. It was a work of art, a place of impossible beauty and staggering wealth. This is 14 Oakmont Drive, Liam said softly. It's about 40 minutes up the coast. I bought the land 5 years ago. I've spent the last 3 years designing and building it. It was finished last week. He paused, letting the information sink in. I was going to give you the keys tonight, Fiona, as my wedding gift, my home, for you to make our home. Fiona stared at the picture, her knuckles white. She looked from the impossible house to Liam's unreadable face. The life she could have had, a life beyond even her parents' wildest ambitions, was staring at her from a piece of photographic paper. A life she had just, with a few careless words and a single act of betrayal, set on fire. But a home, a marriage, a life, they all require a solid foundation, Liam continued, his voice dropping, drawing them all in. And a foundation has to be built on something real. It has to be built on trust, on respect, on honesty. He let his eyes drift from Fiona to her parents, then to her sister Chloe, who was now openly weeping by the window. Finally, his gaze settled on his brother Mark, who had gone completely still by the fireplace, his earlier smirk long since vanished, replaced by a look of dawning dread. And it appears, Liam said, his voice barely a whisper, that the foundation of what we were supposed to build today is compromised. It seems to have a crack in it, a fatal one. The word fatal hung in the air, heavy and sharp. This was no longer about money or status. He had stripped them of their power, shown them the smallness of their world. Now he was going to show them the wreckage they had made of his. Fiona finally found her voice, a desperate, strangled sound. Liam, I don't understand. What are you talking about? He looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of the profound pain he was feeling showed in his eyes. It was not anger. It was a deep, soul-shattering sorrow. Don't you, Fiona? He asked softly. Don't you really? The quiet question was more terrifying than any shout. The game was over. The performance was done. All that was left was the truth. The atmosphere in the suite had grown thick and suffocating, each breath a struggle against the weight of unspoken truths. Fiona shook her head, a frantic, jerky motion. No, I don't know what you mean. A crack? What crack? We're perfect. Everything is perfect. Her voice was high and brittle, the desperate mantra of someone trying to hold a shattered reality together with sheer force of will. Liam didn't answer her directly. His methods were more precise, more architectural. He would deconstruct their web of lies piece by piece, exposing the flawed engineering of their deceit. He turned his gaze to his brother. Mark, he said, and the name fell into the silence like a block of ice. Mark flinched, his eyes darting towards the door as if contemplating escape. You've always been ambitious. I admired that about you. You always wanted what I had, my bicycle when we were kids, my spot on the varsity team, my first car. Liam paused, letting the pattern establish itself. I never minded. I was your big brother. I thought you looked up to me. It seems I misunderstood. You weren't looking up to me. You were measuring me, waiting for your chance to take what you thought was yours. He then turned his devastatingly calm gaze back to Fiona. And you, Fiona, you've always been drawn to ambition, to status, to the idea of a man who could give you the world you felt you deserved. You thought you were marrying down, didn't you? A strategic alliance with a simple, kind man you could control, while keeping your options open. That's not true, Fiona cried, her voice cracking. Richard and Eleanor looked back and forth between them, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Isn't it? Liam's voice was relentless, a calm tide eroding their denials. Now he began to recite the list. It wasn't loud or angry. It was a quiet, factual accounting, a litany of small cuts that now bled in the open. At our engagement party, Eleanor, you asked my Aunt Carol if she'd ever been to a Michelin-starred restaurant before. And when she said no, you smiled and said, "Of course not." You thought I didn't hear. Eleanor paled, her hand fluttering to her pearls. Richard, 2 months ago, When we were discussing wedding plans, you pulled me aside and told me not to worry about the cost because people like me aren't expected to contribute much. You patted my shoulder like I was the valet. Richard's jowls quivered with indignation. I was being generous. You were being insulting, Liam corrected without raising his voice. Fiona, 3 weeks ago, you returned the watch I gave you, the one that belonged to my father, because you said it was outdated and didn't match your family's more contemporary tastes. You exchanged it for a designer handbag. It was a practical decision, she sobbed. It was a symbolic one, he retorted. He catalogued another half-dozen slights, the casual mockery of his modest upbringing, the jokes about his simple life, the constant, grinding condescension that he had absorbed with a smile, all while believing it was for love. Each one was a small, perfectly remembered detail, and the cumulative effect was devastating. He was painting a portrait of them, using their own words and actions as his palette, and the image that emerged was ugly and undeniable. He saved the final, most damning brushstroke for last. He let the silence settle again, a heavy shroud over their exposed cruelty. He looked directly at Fiona, his eyes holding hers, refusing to let her look away. I was standing by the hydrangeas, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Just after the ceremony, the receiving line was overwhelming. I needed a moment to myself, to just breathe and take it all in. He saw the flicker. The first real, undeniable flash of pure terror in her eyes. Mark went rigid by the fireplace, his face turning the color of ash. They knew. It's funny, Liam continued, his voice a study in measured calm. What you can overhear when the world thinks you aren't listening, when they think you're too simple to understand. He didn't need to say the words. He didn't need to repeat the ugly, triumphant confession. He had built the case so meticulously that the conclusion was obvious, inescapable. He had forced them to walk down the path of their own creation, and now they had arrived at the precipice. He let them hang there for a moment, suspended in the awful silence of their guilt. Then he delivered the quiet, final blow, a question, not an accusation. So tell me, Fiona, he asked, his voice soft, almost gentle. And you, Mark, what exactly were you celebrating last night? The question landed in the room like a quiet bomb, the kind that sucks all the oxygen out of the air before the detonation. For a moment, there was only the sound of Chloe's choked sobs from the corner. Fiona's face crumpled. The denial, the indignation, the shock, it all dissolved into the raw, ugly face of guilt. Liam, please, it's not what you think. Isn't it? Liam's voice was devoid of emotion. He was an observer now, a scientist noting the results of a failed experiment. Then what was it, Fiona? An early wedding gift? A final farewell? A release, I believe was the word you used. The direct quote struck her like a physical blow. Her head snapped back and a strangled noise escaped her throat. Mark, finally galvanized by pure panic, took a step forward. Liam, listen, man. It was a mistake. A stupid, drunken mistake. It meant nothing. It meant nothing? Liam turned his head slowly, fixing his brother with a look of such profound disappointment that it was more wounding than any anger. You lay with my fiancé on the eve of our wedding, and it meant nothing? You betrayed my trust, the trust of your own blood, and it meant nothing? He shook his head, a gesture of sad finality. You're right, Mark. You have finally, in your own pathetic way, achieved a state of meaning nothing, at least to me. The words were a judgment, and they cast Mark out into a void. He physically recoiled, his face ashen. Fiona, realizing that pleading was her only remaining currency, scrambled from the sofa and fell to her knees before Liam. It was a desperate, theatrical gesture. Liam, I'm so sorry. I love you. I do. It was a moment of madness, of fear. I was scared of this new life. You were scared? Liam looked down at her, not with pity but with a weary sort of disgust. No, you weren't scared. You were arrogant. You were so convinced of my simplicity, of my love for you, that you believed you could do anything. You believed there would be no consequences. You have confused my patience for weakness. That is a fatal miscalculation. Richard Beaumont, who had been watching this drama unfold with the stunned expression of a man watching his stock portfolio evaporate in real time, finally found his voice. But it wasn't a voice of fatherly concern for his daughter's moral collapse. It was the voice of a dealmaker trying to salvage a catastrophic loss. "Now hold on a minute, son," he blustered, striding forward. He put a hand on Liam's arm. "Let's not be hasty. The boy is right. It was a mistake. A terrible, foolish mistake. But she loves you. And you, my God, son, the house, the company. Think of what you're building. You can't throw all that away over one little indiscretion." Liam looked at the hand on his arm, then up at Richard's desperate, avaricious face, and he laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a dry, humorless bark of disbelief. "Throw it all away?" he said, pulling his arm free. "I'm not throwing anything away, Richard. I'm salvaging what's left of my integrity. I'm choosing to keep the things that are actually valuable." He looked down at Fiona, still kneeling on the floor. "And that does not include a wife who shares her bed with my brother." He turned, his decision made, absolute and irrevocable. "I will be having the marriage annulled first thing in the morning, on the grounds of fraud." He let that word sink in. "Fiona, the lease on the apartment you and I were meant to share is in my name. I expect you and your belongings to be gone within 24 hours. A knock, firm and precise, sounded at the suite door. All heads turned. Liam didn't even flinch. "That will be my partner." He walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was Arthur Vance, a distinguished man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a spine of steel. He was holding a sleek, silver briefcase. He took in the scene in the room: Fiona on the floor, Mark looking like a ghost, the Beaumonts in shock, and his gaze softened with understanding as it landed on Liam. "Everything is handled, Liam," Arthur said, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. He stepped into the room, his presence commanding immediate respect. He nodded curtly at Richard. "Beaumont, I see you finally met the senior partner." Arthur's arrival was the final, crushing confirmation of Liam's power. It removed any lingering doubt, any desperate hope the Beaumonts might have had that this was all a bluff. This was real. This was happening. Arthur placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. "The legal team is on standby. The annulment papers are drawn up. We've already initiated the process to have Mark Sterling removed from the board of the family foundation and all associated trusts." Mark's head snapped up. "What? You can't do that." "Oh, I can," Liam said quietly, turning to face his brother one last time. "The morality clause. Dad was a stickler for that. I am now the sole executor of the estate. You are no longer my brother in my heart, and as of tomorrow, you will no longer be my brother on paper." This was the final cut, the severance of the last tie. It was a fate worse than disinheritance. It was erasure. Liam looked around the opulent room, at the wreckage of the lives that had just hours before seemed so perfect and unassailable. He felt no triumph, only a vast, empty sadness and the clean, cold relief of a necessary demolition. "Goodbye, Fiona," he said, not looking at her. He and Arthur turned and walked out of the suite, leaving the Beaumonts in the broken shell of his brother to face the ruins they had created. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, the sound of a future and a past being sealed forever. 6 months later, the sun, a brilliant autumn gold, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the house at 14 Oakmont Drive. It illuminated dust motes dancing in the air and cast long, dramatic shadows across the polished concrete floors. In the center of the vast, open-plan living space, Liam Sterling stood before a drafting table, a charcoal pencil in his hand. He was not sketching a building, he was sketching a tree, a gnarled, ancient oak, paying close attention to the intricate network of its branches and the deep furrows of its bark. The house was quiet, save for the distant cry of a gull and the gentle whisper of the waves on the shore below. He was at peace. The annulment had been swift and quiet. The Beaumonts, stripped of their leverage and terrified of the public scandal, had capitulated on every point. The story they spun to their social circle was a vague tale of irreconcilable differences, but the truth, as it so often does, had seeped out in whispers and rumors. The story of their arrogance and their daughter's infidelity contrasted with the quiet, hidden power of the man they had so spectacularly underestimated, had become a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails at the country club. Richard Beaumont's business had taken a significant hit. Several of his key investors, friends of Arthur Vance, had quietly pulled their funding, citing a sudden loss of confidence. He had been forced to sell his prized yacht and downsize to a smaller, less impressive home. Eleanor had retreated from her socialite life, the queen bee dethroned. Her reign ended not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of doors in her face. Fiona had, for a time, tried to maintain her lifestyle. She had moved in with her sister Chloe, but the relationship, already strained by Chloe's guilt, had fractured completely. Fiona's sense of entitlement had not diminished with her circumstances, and she had quickly worn out her welcome. The last Liam had heard, she was working as a hostess at a trendy downtown restaurant, a place she used to frequent as a patron. He had felt a brief, passing pang of something, not pity, but a sad acknowledgement of wasted potential, before letting the thought go. Her fate was her own creation. And Mark. Liam had held firm. His brother was cut off, not just financially but entirely. He had been forced to sell his flashy condo and car. He had tried to find work, but the story of his betrayal had made him toxic. No one wanted to hire the man who had so publicly and callously betrayed his own brother. He had sent Liam dozens of emails, oscillating between angry accusations and pathetic pleas for forgiveness. Liam had read none of them. He had set up a filter that sent them all, unread, to a folder labeled Past. Arthur had worried about him at first. He had feared that the betrayal would leave Liam bitter and isolated in his glass palace by the sea. But Liam had surprised him. He had grieved the loss, not of Fiona, but of the dreams she had represented. He had mourned the brother he thought he'd had. And then, he had done what he always did. He had started to build again. He had thrown himself into his work with a renewed focus. He took on a pro bono project designing a community center for an underserved neighborhood. He started mentoring young architects at the local university. He filled his magnificent empty house not with things, but with people. Old friends, his Aunt Carol, the boisterous family of his partner Arthur. He hosted dinners and game nights and movie marathons. He filled the quiet spaces with laughter and life. He looked at his drawing of the oak tree. He had learned from it. Its strength was not just in its towering height, but in its deep, unseen roots. Its beauty was not in its perfect symmetry, but in its imperfections, its resilience, the way it had grown and adapted to storms and seasons. He had been so focused on building the perfect structure, the perfect life, that he had forgotten the most important element, the flawed, unpredictable, and ultimately beautiful nature of humanity. His ordeal had not made him cynical, it had made him wise. It had taught him the profound difference between value and worth. The Beaumonts had been obsessed with value, the cost of things, the status they conferred. He had learned to cherish worth, the loyalty of a true friend, the unconditional love of family, the quiet dignity of a life lived with integrity. A car crunched on the gravel driveway. Liam smiled. It was Arthur, arriving for their weekly chess game. He put down his pencil, wiped the charcoal from his fingers, and went to the door to welcome his friend. As he stepped out onto the porch, a cool sea breeze washed over him. He took a deep breath. The air was clean and salty. He was free. He had torn down the compromised structure of his old life, and in its place, he was building something far stronger, something true, something that would last. And so, Liam's story comes to a close, not with a fiery revenge, but with a quiet, dignified peace. He didn't lower himself to his antagonist's level. He simply removed them from his life and allowed the natural consequences of their own actions to play out. He learned that true strength isn't about how much you have, but about who you are when everything is on the line. What do you think? Was Liam right to expose them so publicly, or would you have handled it differently? The central lesson for me is about the importance of self-worth and knowing that you should never have to shrink yourself to make others feel comfortable. It's a powerful reminder that respect is the foundation of any healthy relationship. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories about justice, redemption, and the power of integrity. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember to build your life on a foundation of truth.